Coming up today, South Korea is set to announce its own tougher unilateral sanctions on North Korea, separate from the recently implemented UN Security Council sanctions against the regime. South Korea's intelligence agency calls an emergency meeting on cybersecurity amid the growing threat posed by North Korea's cyber attacks. The agency says it foiled a suspected North Korean hack on the country's rail operator. First, the UN says Japan must do more to support the victims of its wartime system of sexual slavery. It also calls on Seoul and Tokyo to properly implement their recently agreed deal on the issue. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Tuesday, March 8th here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this morning, President Park Geun-hye has stressed the importance of national unity at this time when South Korea's security is being threatened by North Korea. The South Korean leader made the rallying call on Monday during a regular meeting with her senior secretaries in Seoul. Our Song Ji-sun starts us off.
President Park Geun-hye once again emphasized the importance of implementing the new international sanctions on North Korea to make the regime change its ways. With Seoul set to announce its own sanctions against the North on Tuesday, Park called on the UN member nations to follow suit and impose additional multilateral and bilateral sanctions on Pyongyang. As threats from Pyongyang increase, in reaction to the largest annual joint Korea-US military drills that kicked off on Monday, President Park called for a stern response to any aggression from the north.
북한에는 추가 도발 시 응분의 대가를 치르게 될 것이라는 것을 확실히 보여주기를 바랍니다. 또한 이렇게 엄중한 상황에서는 우리 내부의 단합이 매우 중요합니다. 안보를 정쟁의 대상으로 삼아서는 안 될 것입니다. 국민의 단합된 힘으로 위기를 극복할 수 있도록 정치권에서도 협조해 주시기를 부탁드립니다.
Playing down the opposition bloc's claims about a recently approved counterterrorism bill, President Park promised that the personal information of citizens would not be collected indiscriminately. With Seoul's intel agency set to convene an emergency meeting on Tuesday regarding increasing threats posed by North Korea, President Park urged lawmakers to pass a long-pending bill on counterterrorism so that the country can protect itself against cyber attacks from Pyongyang and other terror groups. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Now, in a worrying development, it has emerged that North Korea tried to hack into the smartphones of key South Korean officials and even agencies in charge of the nation's railways. This is according to the South's intelligence agency on Monday. Regarding attempts to compromise the railway system, the National Intelligence Service said it detected the attempted breaches beforehand and prevented any infiltration. Regardless, the NIS will hold an emergency government-wide meeting on Tuesday as the threat of cyber terrorism from North Korea becomes more and more pronounced, especially in the wake of the latest UN Security Council sanctions on the regime. North Korea was behind major cyber attacks on South Korea's banking system in 2011 and television stations in 2013. South Korea is going to announce a set of unilateral sanctions on North Korea on Tuesday afternoon. Coming on the heels of the toughest UN sanctions on Pyongyang to date, the new set of measures will turn the screw on the North even more. Connie Kim with the details.
South Korea's separate set of unilateral sanctions on North Korea are expected to increase pressure on Pyongyang. When the Prime Minister's office releases the sanctions on Tuesday afternoon, Seoul is expected to ban all ships that have traveled through North Korea. Once implemented, the measures imposed by Seoul will be tougher than those following the North's torpedoing of the warship Cheonan in 2010. There is also speculation that the sanctions will include suspension of the joint railway project, dubbed the Najin Hasan Logistics Project, involving the two Koreas and Russia. The project aimed to transport Russian coal to South Korea via North Korea, a symbol of trilateral cooperation and a pivotal part of President Park Geun-hye's Eurasia Initiative.
In regards to supporting the Lajin Hassan project, Seoul is reviewing the purpose, content, and how the sanctions are being implemented along with various situations in the international community.
Individuals expected to be blacklisted include Kim Yo-jong, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's sister, and also the head of the North Secretary Office, which funneled 70% of the wages from the inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Park to weapons development. The Kaesong complex was closed by Seoul last month in response to Pyongyang's nuclear and long-range missile tests. The imminent sanctions come on the heels of new UN sanctions, the strongest imposed on North Korea in more than 2 decades.
If we lay out additional unilateral sanctions on North Korea, it will encourage UN member nations to follow suit. Being a major contributor to the strongest sanctions against Pyongyang, we will garner support from the international community.
Although experts say backlash from North Korea is expected after Seoul announces its new set of sanctions against Pyongyang on Tuesday, there is also hope that measures will force the reclusive regime to make long-term changes. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea and the United States began their annual joint military drills on Monday. The allies decided to make this year's exercises the largest to date, following North Korea's recent nuclear test and long-range missile launch. Kim Hyun-bin has the details.
South Korea's defense ministry says it will strongly retaliate if North Korea carries out a provocation during the drills.
If North Korea continues to ignore our warnings and carries on with its provocations, we will sternly counter, and the regime will be responsible for its reckless actions.
The Allies' annual joint military drills, dubbed Key Resolve and Full Eagle, are now underway as tension simmers on the Korean peninsula. The exercises, which run through the end of April, will involve almost 300,000 South Korean and 15,000 American troops. What's new this year is that the Allies will practice Operational Plan 5015. It will see the forces check what they would do during a preemptive strike on North Korea's nuclear facilities and missile sites. The troops will also conduct training missions involving the 4 Ds, namely detect, disrupt, destroy, and defend. In addition to doubling the number of U.S. troops taking part in this year's exercises, Washington will also deploy some key military hardware to the Korean peninsula for the first time, including an aircraft carrier, nuclear submarine, and 2 40,000-ton amphibious assault ships. There's also been word that Washington could deploy its nuclear-capable B-2 stealth bomber. In a real-life combat scenario, the aircraft could be deployed on missions in North Korean territory and remain undetected while targeting key military facilities. Experts say the B-2 is the weapon the North fears most because of its stealth and bombing capabilities. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Now, it has been revealed that 4 North Korean cargo ships were blocked from entering Chinese and Russian ports over the weekend under the conditions of the recently adopted UN sanctions on the regime for its nuclear and missile provocations. According to the Seoul-based news agency YTN, 3 North Korean ships blacklisted under the sanctions tried to enter Chinese ports in Shandong and Shanghai on Friday and Saturday. Another blacklisted North Korean vessel was refused entry into Russia's Vostochny port on Sunday. Now, Seoul's foreign ministry says it knew about the scheduled port calls and requested the 2 countries reject their entry ahead of time. It added that the South Korean government will continue monitoring the location of all 31 North Korean ships on the UN blacklist. Now, turning our attention to domestic politics, and the leadership of Korea's minor opposition People's Party is split over whether to reunite with the main opposition camp ahead of the general election that is set for mid-April. Shin Se-min has the details.
Opposing views on the issue of uniting opposition forces. The rift among leaders of the country's minor opposition People's Party continues to grow following an official rejection on Friday to the major party of Korea's proposal to join forces. Representative Kim Han-gil, the chief campaign manager of the People's Party, laid down the gauntlet during the party's general meeting Monday, saying that the best interest of the country and the history of democracy should take priority over the party's own interests.
Achieving successful parliamentary negotiations shouldn't be the goal of our party. Integrated resistance against the ruling party for the sake of the people is needed.
Following Kim's statement, An Chol-soo, co-chair of the party, reaffirmed his stance, rejecting suggestions of possible alliance of opposition forces and even an electoral coalition.
Unconditional consolidation of the parties is the path to failure. I believe the people will not regress by granting the ruling party a majority of seats in parliament.
An said that the party's official stance will not change based on an individual's opinion and referred to his goal of new politics, which is to break the two-party political system. The discord follows the proposal from Minju Party's interim leader Kim Jong-un last Wednesday to unite for victory in the April's general elections and to lay the groundwork for governmental change at the presidential election in 2017. Reflecting the turmoil in the opposition bloc, the approval ratings of the People's Party fell to its lowest in 2 weeks at 11.5%, raising concerns of whether or not the party will maintain its unity ahead of the April 13th general elections. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, the UN Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women has urged the Japanese government to stop any acts of denigration toward the victims of its wartime system of sexual slavery. The committee said on Monday that the agreement made between Korea and Japan late last year did not take the Korean survivors' claims and feelings into consideration. It added that Tokyo must listen to the women's voices and guarantee compensation. The committee also pointed out that Japan must accept its past atrocities and stop distorting history. That includes providing an accurate representation of the so-called comfort women issue in its history textbooks. The international body also expressed regret the agreement between Seoul and Tokyo was not being properly implemented to the letter of the UN's recommendations. So, as we just heard, Korea and Japan recently did reach a landmark agreement on Tokyo's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women, but independent developments regarding the issue continue to unfold, including outside of the two countries. A resolution on Japan's past atrocities is expected to be introduced in New York City on Tuesday, and this will make it the third American city pushing for the move. Kwon So-ah has the details.
New York City is pushing for a resolution on the so-called comfort women issue. Marking International Women's Day, officials are slated to announce an introduction to the resolution at a press conference in New York City Hall Tuesday local time. It comes in support of a similar resolution passed by the U.S. Congress in 2007. The resolution demands that Japan formally acknowledge and apologize for its sexual enslavement of Asian women during its colonial and wartime occupation from the 1930s through the end of World War II. It also urges the Japanese government to teach current and future generations of its, quote, horrible crime. If adopted, New York City's resolution will be the third of its kind among major U.S. cities. One was passed last year in Chicago and another in San Francisco. The latter included a call for erecting a memorial in the city. 88-year-old Lee Yong-soo, a survivor of Japan's past atrocities, is going to attend the announcement in New York. While there, she will also deliver a rare speech at the UN headquarters during an International Women's Day event where she is expected to convey her view on the deal struck between Seoul and Tokyo in December on the comfort women issue. Only 44 South Korean victims are alive today, and many of them do not accept the agreement, saying it lacks sincerity and doesn't clearly state that Japan takes full legal responsibility for its actions. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
The Pentagon has confirmed that both manned and unmanned aircraft have carried out a strike in Somalia, killing an estimated 150 al-Shabaab fighters. Pentagon spokesman Captain Jeff Davies says the camp, about 200 kilometers north of the capital Mogadishu, was hit over the weekend. He said the fighters were in the final stages of training for a large-scale attack on US and African Union forces. US officials say the camp had been monitored for several weeks before the attack. The al-Qaeda-linked group has been responsible for terrorist attacks throughout East Africa. Well, that's all we have for now on this Tuesday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for watching, and we'll be back throughout the day with more newscasts. Our next scheduled one coming up at noon Korea time. Until then, goodbye.